now that we have all of our pictures in place, we are going to begin editing our text. And there are a couple of things I want to go over with the text options, mostly focusing on this title page. But what we're going to do is go ahead and put in those graphics that we had in the original layout. So if you locked down your words and your graphics, you want to go to Object and unlock all on Spread. Now, once you've unlocked those, you may choose to go through, grab all of your pictures, and lock them down. I'm going to do that just because I don't want to move them around. I want to use them. Remember, it won't let me lock if I have yellow arrow selected, yellow bounding box. All of my boxes have to be blue boxes, otherwise it won't let me lock them. So now my pictures are locked and I can ungroup my text. Okay, editing text. First of all, in your paragraph styles, what I would like you to do is simply click on this first text box, and I would like you to go over to character. Okay? I just want you to bump up the size of the text. Let's turn it up to 14. And I would like you to pick a font that you like. Any font will work. Okay, I prefer the look of that one. Then what I would like for you to do is I would like you to increase the spacing. Okay, so there are several options you have in this character bar. Each of these little pictures kind of shows you what they do. But the thing that I'm going to have you do right now is increase the spacing between each letter. I find it easier to read, and especially when it's a small font, I think it's important to make sure there's plenty of space in what you're reading. Okay, so that, if you watch on the text box to the left, is simply increasing the amount of space between each letter. You can come to this upper button to increase the spacing between each line. Okay, so if you're still having a hard time reading it, or maybe you have a lot of text and you're having a hard time fitting it in, you can increase the spacing between each line. Okay? Also, we will go over these options below, but they're more suited for using a title as opposed to smaller paragraph fonts. The next thing I want you to do in this particular paragraph is I want you to go to the paragraph button, and they're usually right below each other. And I want you to use justified, okay, because that is how most publications are. You're going to use this justified tool. Go ahead and use the one to the far right. And it's going to keep this nice and lined up. I want you to unclick your hyphen button. You do not need hyphens. Now, this does in some places create strange spaces, and it depends on your personality and what you prefer. But I am less bothered by the strange spaces than I am by all of the ins and outs on the end of the paragraph. So you choose whichever one works best for you. Now you need to click on this text box with your black arrow, and I'm going to have you create a paragraph style. Okay? When you create a paragraph style, it's just like creating a new swatch. You're simply going to create new, and then I would go in and rename it. I'm just going to name it Mandy for right now. Now that paragraph style can be used in another document as well. So maybe if you really like the font you chose and the way it's laid out, you can use that paragraph style in your own personal project. So I will click on these two text boxes, and I'm going to take them and make them both into that particular style. All right. The next thing we're going to edit is our title. So let's try to come up with a main title, which is probably just the city that you chose, and then try to think of a subtitle that you could add to that, which will require for you to add a new text box. So to avoid having issues of things overlapping, you can use your fitting tools on your text as well. So I'm going to right click on this and say fit frame to content. That way it's only taking up that area. And I might just make my bounding box a little bit bigger. Okay. So then when I adjust my fonts, I know that I want my title to fit within that box, and I will just have to adjust if for any reason it doesn't. Now I can add in another text, and this is where you might decide whether you want to keep this as a large space between these three photos or whether you'd rather have them spaced evenly. And I'm just going to make up kind of a catchy phrase or something. I'll say, a country full of community. A lot of the pictures I chose are sporting events and community things like eating together, having coffee together. I'm going to go ahead and bump up the size of that. I'm not going to worry about the rest of the text right now. I just want to make sure it's big enough to kind of fill that space. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing and say fit frame to content. And I'm going to move it into that space so that it looks intentional, that there's a weird space in between those pictures. How can you edit text? Well, there's a lot of ways you can edit text. There are the obvious ways of editing your text, which are changing the font type, which you should have a lot of options available to you because we download some for Yearbook each year. There are the basic fonts, and then you can always download a font online if you would like to use one. I don't suggest that for this project, but maybe for your magazine tutorial or your magazine personal project, you might want to have something that's not just off the shelf. It's more unique to you. So I'm just going to play around with a couple of different fonts. I actually really like that bold font, so I'm going to adjust the size and the spacing, as we talked about before. I can reduce that spacing between each letter. I can also reduce just its overall width and keep the height the same, which I think would be to my advantage, so that I still feel the space. So all I'm doing is trying to fit, there we go, I've got Ethiopia in there. At this point, I'm going to try to make this subheading work with the same general feel. So I can do one of two things. One, I could just copy the font and then reduce the size down to more of a sub font. That's probably the best bet. Anytime you want fonts to match, it makes sense to just start with the same font. But I'm going to spread it out to fill that space. Okay. Within this font, there are also a few other options. One option is to right-click and go to your effects button. Okay. Some of these effects can be really cool if you know how to use them correctly. I'll admit drop shadow is kind of my go-to with fonts. But remember, I have all of these different things that I can play around with. You can do a feathering type of thing. Probably don't want to use those in conjunction. As you can see, it doesn't look great. Maybe you want it to fade away. You can do a bevel to make it look more of like a three-dimensional font. That's often helpful. You can do a combination of those two. And remember, within each of these, there's also tons of other options that you can use. You could adjust just the stroke or the fill. You can also adjust just the text. When you're giving these options to just the text, it does look a little bit different than applying it to the entire box. So play around with those. Find something that works for you. I'm happy with that as kind of a bold font. You may also choose to add some color boxes in there to enhance the graphics if you would like. But for now, that should give you an idea of your different options within text. Different ways that you can size it. And remember, all of those options are in your character and paragraph. They are also at the top. Okay? If you are double-clicked on it, you'll notice that the top portion changes to allow you more options. You can give it an underline. You can cross through it. You can also change the color of the text up there. There aren't a lot of options for bold unless it's part of the font itself. But if you want to make a text more bold, what you would need to do is highlight it and give it not only a fill color, but also an outline. And that makes it a little bit more bold looking. In this instance, it makes it really hard to read, so I'm going to remove that. That should be everything you need to know